Welcome to the Build and Revitalize podcast. We're glad you're here. You'll find stories ranging from engineers wanting to spelunk newfound caves, highlighting women's success in the AEC industry, to the importance of co-op opportunities for aspiring engineers. We value good stories told by even better people. Sit back and listen to an AEC podcast brought to you by SME.
Welcome to the Build and Revitalize podcast. I'm Wes Hemp, Senior Geotechnical Engineer for SME's New Albany office. And I'm here with Justin Ramirez, Resident Engineer with Lochmueller Group.
Thanks for having me today, Wes.
Justin and I have known each other for a long time. I think we were trying to count back earlier how far.
I think 12 years.
12 years. I'll take that, plus or minus. So
yeah,
that sounds about right. I know we've been working together more frequently here in the past, 5 to 6, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ever since I joined the Jeffersonville office with Lochmueller Group, I've gotten to work with you a little more frequently.
Yeah. So we've gotten involved in a very unique project over the course of the past year plus, I believe. We're referring to the Jeffersonville North Wastewater Treatment Plant project. I had the privilege of doing the original geotechnical evaluation for that site, which was, I think that was
2010.
That sounds about right. I know that site pretty well. And of course, so it kind of gave me a little bit of insight as what to look forward to, with this evaluation. We kind of got surprised though. Interesting thing occurred. We were out there, we did the geotechnical evaluation, moved into construction. And lo and behold, we found a cave. So we're here today to discuss how we found this cave, how we characterize it, what we did about it, and so forth. As best I recall, and my memory is fuzzy. I barely remember yesterday, if I'm being honest. I think we discovered it around the March of last year.
We hit rock February 16th, and the contractor notified us. We discussed and did some over-excavation. And then the first week in March, because I was on vacation, I remember I got a call saying that they found a fissure in the ground. We didn't realize it was actually a cave system until probably 2 weeks later. I was standing on site in the morning. It was still pretty chill out, and I noticed there's steam coming out of 2 openings.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so we had kind of come up with a solution to just solve the fissures in the ground. And then as soon as I call you and go, hey, I've got warm steam coming out, then we both kind of decided we might need to look further into this.
Of course, we noticed a few vertical shafts. I think there were 3 or 4 openings in the ground that were exposed. Had no idea where they went, what they connected to. And then I remember getting that call from you that, hey, look what we got coming out of the ground. And you sent me a video of, actual steam coming out of the ground. So that told me there was something bigger and badder under there that we hadn't yet seen. So it was quite interesting.
Yeah, we didn't know if we needed to contract with the contractor and have their sub do it, or if it was better for you to do it. But I think we ultimately decided, like, you did the original geo, so it'd probably be best if you stuck with it and helped us with this issue.
Yeah, and I think that was probably best. And admittingly, I was like a kid in a candy shop, when this whole thing popped up. So I was more than
you were all smiles involved when you jumped on site.
I was trying to contain myself, so it was hard, but I did my best. But it was interesting. We started off going out there and we did a geophysical survey just to try to map. Okay, well, what are these things interconnected? What's going on? What can we see from the surface? We got some, I think, decent results from that. And the geophysicist pointed out a couple of areas, that we should...
Some concern spots that we should...
Yeah, to poke and, and do some test borings and see what's going on. We didn't pick up on this cave feature, which was the interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just incidentally, one of the locations actually pierced right through the roof, through the center of the feature, if I remember correctly.
So that was after the geophysicist gave us his results, and then you asked for some coring to be done.
Yeah.
And that was in a location that we're like, let's just check this in between. And I was just dying of curious. So I jerry-rigged a GoPro video camera on a paintbrush stick.
High-tech equipment here, guys.
Yeah. And lowered this down with a paint roller, basically, a 20-foot extension, videoed it, pulled it back out. And that's when I looked at the video and I go, oh no. We found a cave system basically underneath one of these borings, and that was the only spot we found like a clear definition where the boring crew came to us and said, hey, we lost a bit. We think there's some empty space here and we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. So I recall that we went out there for the first round of coring, which occurred after the geophysical evaluation, which kind of like backing up a little bit. The geophysical evaluation, we utilized a couple of different methods. It was interesting the way that we had to do it. We weren't necessarily able to use the techniques we would typically would in this type of situation. The rock was exposed at the surface, in this corner of the basin area. Typically, we like to use like electrical resistivity method where we're getting those two-dimensional slices in the ground. We couldn't do that because you have to drive probes into the ground, which would have meant drilling, many, many holes and, sticking these things down in there just would not have worked efficiently. So we used electromagnetics and kind of mapped the surface and kind of a couple different horizontal slices within the ground to get a general idea of, where the cave might be. But, it didn't show a whole lot. Or actually at that point, we didn't know it was a cave, right? So we didn't know until after the borings. So then we did some seismic MASW imaging as well across the long ways, I believe, through the shafts. The shafts were lined up like 1, 2, 3 in a row. 4 if you count the one that was on the north side of the ox ditch wall. I don't think it showed anything really either of any substance. It was
nothing conclusive.
Yeah, there was conflicting data is what I recall. But even still, we found some areas that were worth checking out. We check them. The driller gets out there and he drills his holes, and one of the holes actually goes through the right spot, which we didn't know it at the time. And the core barrel goes through, it gets crooked, gets wedged down in the bottom and breaks off. So now there's $2,500 sitting in the hole, basically.
Yeah, they were not happy.
No, I don't think anybody was happy. But we found something important, and we proved what we needed to prove, I think. So that was a positive that came out of that. At least that's the way I'm spinning it. So he might still have other ideas. So that was, that was really awesome. And I think after that, I remember the next phase was trying to figure out, how do we further characterize this thing? So we tried, I think, poking some more holes too, is what I recall. We had no idea of orientation. We have these holes in the ground. There's a big void in the ground. We don't know if it's run north to south, east to west, somewhere in between. How wide is it? Any of that stuff. So I recall you going out there and doing a big Hollywood production with the GoPro.
I used the GoPro again and a few more lights that I bought from the store. So I'm swinging lights down into this feature. And we figured out from the first video that 2 of our features that were really close were actually connected. One we thought ended in a dead end actually took a hard right turn and opened into this bigger cavern that we initially filmed. And so I'm dropping lights down in that to try and put more light, and then I'm slowly maneuvering my camera around in a circle, calling out northeast, northwest. And so we finally got a general idea of where this was going, but we just couldn't put a scope to it. We didn't have a scale.
Yeah. And we didn't know what it was. We were like, well, did we just find the Southern Indiana mega cavern, right? Are we gonna be able to give tours here? Is there an alternate source of revenue for the city possibly, right? It's like,
do we need to stop what we're doing for the contract and move this structure? I mean, we really didn't know.
Yeah, in all seriousness, right. I mean, we've got a $14 million structure, I think, that was going on top of this. We had no idea how it was positioned. So it's like, well, do we move? And then I remember, we don't really have the greatest place to move to. We'd already started work here. If we had moved to the alternate site, I think rock was shallower over there, so we knew we were going to get into a bunch of rock removal.
Yep.
And who knows what happens when we do that, because
we did rock removal on this site and we already found this. And so we were afraid if we move to another location and start taking all this rock, what else could we find?
There really isn't any reason to change anything because it still has to be done at the end of the day. We need to construct this, and the whole plant was already there. So it didn't make sense really to try to shift things. That was my recollection. And so we moved forward and, we evaluate this area. And incidentally, this whole time, while we're trying to do all these evaluations with geophysical and drilling and all that, we've got other stuff going on. The ag piers are being installed. So we're working on top of each other.
Yeah, it was a lot of coordination, contractors pushing because they're getting further behind on their schedule. And so the geo piers go in, and luckily we don't hit any other openings that we find drilling these in. And we knew the back southern half we wouldn't because it was all fill. But I mean, this was a very large oxidation ditch we're trying to put in. And so coordinating between getting the piers in, getting concrete started, and us trying to. The contractor thought we were just playing in this corner and having so much fun, but we're trying to come up with a solution for them and keep everybody safe.
And it was a challenge because at the same time that we're trying to get this accomplished, there's other work going on. We're trying to like stay out of each other's way. And at the same time, we're continually losing access to the site as they continue to build. We're kind of getting boxed in. We're in a recessed area that's probably, 20 feet from adjacent grade. There's no great way to get back into the hole after a certain time period, unless you want to have a crane lift everything in and out. So there was a lot of time pressures there is what I remember, to get things done.
Yeah, because they're pouring concrete mats, and they want to start putting walls up in the southern west corner of the structure. And so we're trying to coordinate with them, and we're losing road access. And so that kind of put us under the gun of like, okay, we need to come up with a new idea to evaluate what we're seeing on the film.
And, and moving forward after we got into the first round of drilling, we lost the core barrel, which we mentioned, which was kind of like a blessing in disguise. It told us there was really something going on there when everything just kind of dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you go through and, you did your lighting and, with the GoPro work and all that. And I think Alex Dodson was out there with you as well.
Yes.
Initially when you were doing that. And we did several rounds of like trying to like characterize through the different holes. And I think we found a couple other openings that kind of sort of punctured, like where this was at. I think we did that in a second round of drilling.
We brought a second drill rig, and you and I marked a couple locations where we were hoping to get more information. And ironically, we didn't hit anything. Like a couple of them opened up, but like at that point I was dropping, smoke bombs. I was dropping glow sticks, trying to see anything coming out of these locations to see if they tied into this big cavern, and none of them did. I think on the southern half, we were able to establish the fact that there was a clear seam running from two of the karst features we found. And so we were able to get a better idea, but those only went down maybe 12 feet in depth and were maybe, a foot wide at the worst and most likely 8 inches on average. But the main cavern we were looking at dropped 20 feet. And, on camera, it looked like it was an opening of 10 feet. And so that's what we used to get these cores. But then we realized, okay, we didn't hit anything, and we got the B team for the core rig. So they weren't really moving quickly enough to get us more cores like we were hoping. And I think that's kind of the point where you and I looked at each other and I said, I think we need to try something different. And that's when we got the survey crew out.
That's when we went to plan C at this point, I guess.
C or D, yeah.
Yeah, we're somewhere there. We're getting through the alphabet pretty quickly here. But I remember that I brought up the idea to you and to Mike Gangstad, and I think Lennon was probably on the call too. It was like, hey, we need to characterize the size of this void. I got an idea, and it was something I had tried before that worked pretty well. And we ended up getting a gyroscope laser scanner and inserting down into the hole. This thing probably cost as much as my house, so we had to be very careful about how we did it. I remember we had to get some PVC piping and cut and insert into these holes. And I went home and I was so happy because I got to get my tools out and build some little frames and everything. And I don't get to do arts and crafts much anymore, Justin. So, I had a good time with that. And so then we went out there and we stuck them into the hole. We found some guys who have experience in the mining industry and use this for mining or characterizing mining shafts. So again, it was a gyroscope laser scanner, and you remember the thing. It was just looked like a long torpedo.
Yeah, and the head could move around, and I mean those guys were super knowledgeable, super professional. I had a great time. Like the camera had to drop and slowly work its way down through the tubes, and they would scatter shot. And as they scattered shot, they had a computer connected to everything. And so we're talking. Alex was on site again, and her and I are talking with these two guys, and they're showing us the scatter shots as they're coming in, and we're all just sitting there. And the first few were kind of expected, and then there's one where the main cavern where I had been dropping my GoPro down into, they did finally at last, and they started shooting that thing, and we all just went, oh dang. They're like, yeah, we can't even shoot scatters far enough back. This thing is going so far, but we can tell. They were able to tell us like scale wise, we think it's roughly this, but we'll have to wait until we get, everything put together in a model. And we knew clearly too, there was some water moving through that. From rain events, we could hear rushing water down in it. And every time we put the GoPro down after rain, it looked wet. So obviously there's water coming in from somewhere helping to clear a path. And we were really trying to avoid clogging that because we were afraid, well, where's the water going to move next?
Yeah.
Like we don't want it to rush under an existing building. And next thing we have is we're creating caverns.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge is like, how do you deal with these things? And that's why we had to take all these steps to fit it all together. And I remember at the end of the day, we had 4 models, I believe, that had to be, all the data had to be like
merged
and jumbled together and some sense made of it. And at the end of the day, we got a nice, 3D model. And if I recall correctly, it was 790 cubic feet, I think was the estimation of the volume.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Yeah. So the K feature, it was, I don't recall the exact lengths. I'm thinking we were somewhere around maybe 40, 50 feet, but it wasn't a perfect cave structure. It was, it was kind of like a narrowest feature,
It looked like where water flows. It definitely looked like, I think water had carved out a channel underground, but the cap was 11 foot deep. And then, a laser measurement put it at about 20 to 21 foot to when we hit ground again. So, I mean, it was every bit of a 10 foot.
I think at that center location, I think we were actually 27 feet from ground surface to bottom of the cave and about 5-6 feet of limestone there. So yeah, there's like about a 20 foot like open air space, in the center of the feature, and it's elongated. It was kind of northwest-ish to southeast-ish, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, kind of, more or less north and south. And of course, right along the footing line, like we talked before. And I remember, I think on the extreme north end and on the extreme south end, it kind of like came back up and they were just like elongated shelves.
Yes.
From north to south.
Yeah. It found a channel where water was flowing towards the southwest and we think was tying into the existing small creek out back of the plant. Because we actually did find some mud at one point after a heavy rain where we think everything was tying in. Didn't actually make it to the creek, but we could tell that I think it was heading in that direction through the job site. And then the main shaft, to the very north of it, from the survey crew, we found out that it was probably 40 foot long before we couldn't see any more, but they pretty much said we got a few specks back there. It's just, so it probably kept going. And
because I recall that we could see on the, the video imagery and the photographs that it looked like kind of dropped off and made a turn, kind of towards the west. And it's like, well, who knows what happens at that point, right?
That's when spelunking was really on the table for me.
He spent so much time on this; it was unbelievable. And you remember that shirt that I got for you at the
end? Oh
yeah, yeah. So because of all his hard work, I got him a t-shirt, and if I remember right, it said cave, eat, sleep, repeat, or something like that.
Along those lines.
Yeah, and it's kind of what you were doing there for about a month or so. It seemed like
it really was. I spent a lot of my time trying to get us better information on this because there was a gap in time between, all of the initial information before we got the survey guys out, and so during that dead time, I was doing my best to figure out what is going on. Can I figure this out? And I really wanted to see into the blackness that just went off into nothing. I was ready to put on some spelunking equipment.
Oh man, I was having to keep my eye on you. So
yeah,
I know had that. I know you got that camera on site where you can watch it 24/7. And like I was sitting there at my desk, I was like, I wonder if Justin's going in the hole today.
I unofficially thought about it a couple times.
Incidentally, this thing mapped out where it was directly underneath of a footing line, and it couldn't have been in a worse spot. It just couldn't have happened. Luckily, we had a pretty robust footing, I think, at that location with the slab and everything. It was like 5.5 feet thick. I mean, you're talking a lot of concrete, a lot of rebar. So then the thought process became, well, okay, it's bad, right? This is sitting on top of the footing. It's partially, we got the slab, like a 2.5 foot thick slab, I think, if I remember right, that was spanning over top. Worst case scenario, if this rock roof, which there was some rock roof that would have been underneath of that slab, if it gives way and this thing is totally unsupported, what happens then? So that's where we start to kind of think more towards, not so much remediation versus, well, can the structure tolerate that? And that's kind of how I think we ended up with our solution, was that, we determined this thing was about 4 feet wide, right? Give or take. It's got like little ledges that kind of go off horizontally sideways that are not very wide, but like the main, open void span was about 4 feet. And, I recall we had a lot of conversations, me and you, the rest of the Lochmueller gang and the structural designer, to say, hey, what happens here? And I think at the end of the day, we determined that, well, if it gave way, it would still, support, whatever it's, the tank is containing, right? Which would have been wastewater, I guess, at that point. So that was, that gave us some confidence that, hey, maybe we've actually got a solution here. And because we still had at least about 5 feet of rock roof, maybe 6 feet of rock roof at the thinnest that was be below.
Thinnest was 5 foot. The thickest in the main cavern was 11.
Yeah.
So we had like a solid 11 feet of limestone from what we could see.
Yeah. So, even still, so that 5 feet really, it's you hate to say it, but it's kind of like a bonus, the fact that it's there. So we're getting that arching action from the rock. But if something did happen and that gave way, we've shown that the structure can still support itself, which at the end of the day is what we were looking for, which was great because, we didn't have to design a remedial system. And it was questionable, like you mentioned earlier, like, well, what would we possibly have done otherwise? Well, we could always fill the hole with concrete or grout, but when you put it in the ground, where does it go?
Yeah.
Where does it stop?
And we couldn't even tell from the scatter shot that we got done because we figured out it was 4 foot wide, but they basically admitted like, hey, this goes back like 100 feet and we can't tell you what happens. We think it drops, but we can't tell you without, coring more holes. But the next location they'd have to go to is existing pavement. That's another, I think 15 to 20 feet higher than where we're already exposed. So we would have had to core down 30 feet to try and open it. And at that point, none of us wanted to poke Pandora's box and be like, hey, what are we dealing with?
Well, and at that point, I think we were encroaching on another structure too. So
we were.
The existing oxidation ditch. We're getting close to like all the underground piping that runs through the roads. Mm-hmm. So it's, you're right. I mean, it becomes really tricky dealing with that. But I think for the purpose of what we were trying to do here with this structure, we got what we needed. And we arrived at a pretty good solution. I know we talked about doing like other things, possibly put on piles or whatever, but it's like, of course, none of that made sense at that point. And I kind of like the way things worked out because we were able to give a solution that didn't require additional work. And I think it provided, the evaluation, the level of evaluation that we provided, kind of let everyone sleep better at night.
Yeah. Yeah. It took time, and we're still dealing with some of the repercussions on site of the time and the schedule delays. At the end of it, everyone knew, hey, we presented a concrete cap to cover these karst features, to bridge everything. And so by the time we did that, plus the base footing that the structural engineer was comfortable with, he had no questions of whether this would work or not. He's like, yeah, with that concrete cap, this thing's golden. And so I think everyone's like, cool, let's build. And so we've hit it 100% to the ground without anyone worrying about, can we get a piece of equipment over there? Can we stand on this? Because there was a couple guys that like kept a 20-foot barrier. They're like, well, what happens if we fall in? What happens if we bring the crane or the excavator near this thing?
Yeah, and that was all warranted at the time too, because you remember how we discovered these things was just by chance. So, they were over there hole ramming out the rock and removing it. And as they're tracking over, these vertical shafts open up. So then the question is like, well, how many more of these are there, right?
Yeah.
If I keep running over this, is it going to turn to a block of, limestone Swiss cheese? I mean, that there were some real concerns there. If the excavator catches a big enough hole, then, it takes a nosedive. What happens then, right? So there were a lot of legitimate concerns. And I think the geophysical survey helped, alleviate some of that as far as like being able to like move around and all that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, once we got the boring data, that really provided some level of confidence. But even still, if you don't have to be there, tracking over, don't be there.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I felt about it. Honestly, I think it worked out in the owner's best interest. Of course, we spent some time, we spent some money, in getting to that solution. But at the end of the day, I like it that we were able to provide that value because we did these high level evaluations. We got awesome data, and we were able to take that and give them basically, a no cost solution. It's just, carry on, be careful, be mindful of what we have here, but carry on as you had planned. And I think that's great. We were able to provide that with even considering, what we're dealing with here, because this is an anomaly. I've been doing, geotech for over 20 years now. I think this is maybe the second or third time that I've come across a cave on a project. It's the first time I've encountered one of this magnitude and this kind of circumstances. This is pretty unique. I'm really pleased with how it played out. Okay, so that wraps up our story. I hope you enjoyed it. We'd like to give special thanks to Mike Gangstad, Lyndon Casturi with Lochmueller Group, as well as Jess Ramirez, who was able to participate with me today. We'd also like to thank Wilkie Engineering, Lynn Ashak with City of Jeffersonville, Alex Dodson with SME, Strata Group provided drilling services, Dugan and Myers, and Respec.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, all we ask is to share it with your fellow colleagues and industry friends. See you next time.